Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to the program this evening, and thank you for your support of the Wyoming State Archive Speaker Series. I'm Robin Everett. I'd like to take a moment to introduce Susie Taylor. She's one of our reference archivists. She's going to be doing the technical support and online moderator for tonight's program. Sarah Davis, our state archivist, is watching online. And a few housekeeping items. If you didn't sign in when you came in, please make certain that you do before you leave. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones. Restrooms are in the lobby back by the elevators. We also have remote viewers for this program. For everyone online and in person, we'll have questions and answers at the end of the program. For our viewers online, your mics and video are turned off during the presentation, but you'll be able to turn them on during questions. Please raise your hand using the icon at the bottom of the screen, and Susie will call on you. Or not appear in the recording, you may ask a question in the chat box and it'll be read by Susie. Tonight's program is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Wyoming State Archives YouTube channel. Tonight's speaker is firearms historian Evan Green. How he doesn't look at Evan has been a firearms hobbyist and shooter and gun collector for over 70 years. Since his youth on a ranch in eastern Colorado. He's been a volunteer at this Wyoming State Museum since 2015. In 2018, he was asked by museum management to update inventory and information on over 400 firearms in the museum's permanent collection and has been working on that project for the past 5 years. Evan is the host of over 75 short YouTube videos entitled Firearms Friday on the Wyoming State Museum's YouTube channel, and the author of several articles on unique firearms in the museum's collection. The recent donation of several elaborately enhanced rifles and handguns inspired him to create tonight's program, Firearms is Art, where he will talk about design elements, tools used, and some of the artists who did the work. Let me turn it over to Evan. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. I want to thank all of you who braved the weather to come out here tonight. That's surprisingly good crowd. I appreciate you making the effort to show up and support the Archives Thursday evening lecture series. I also want to recognize my supervisor, Jennifer Alexander, there in the back. She gives up a lot of her free time to help me with these presentations and with the work I do upstairs in collections. So thank you. And as Robin mentioned, I was kind of inspired to put this program together because we got this amazing donation of firearms from a local collector, a very generous local collector. And we'll see some of those on the screen, and we have some of them up here behind me that you're welcome to come up and take a look at. So, human beings have been creating art and decorating their personal possessions for thousands of years. And the arrival of firearms really created a new canvas for artists to work on. So we're going to look at a bunch of those tonight. If I can see how things work here. Okay, I want to say that not all of the firearms in the presentation are in the museum's collection. They're displayed for context, and we'll make it pretty clear when we make that transition to the guns from our collection. Some of these slides will include depictions of sexual intercourse and nudity. So depending on your proclivities, you can avert your eyes or you can move up front for a better look. Okay, let's see.
Sorry.
This is a video from this Rock Island auction company. They specialize in very high-end collectible firearms. And I'm on their mailing list. I can't afford any of their stuff, but I thought this was a nice introduction in firearms as art. That music was by a guy named Howard Harper Barnes. He's an American composer that kind of reminds me of other classical composers. It was really nice piece of music, I thought. Okay, embellishment over the years, matchlocks to modern firearms. Since I present myself as a firearms historian, I thought it would be appropriate to talk a little bit about the history of firearms. Probably the first instance of using gunpowder was by the Chinese in the 9th and 10th centuries. They had something they called a fire lance, and it was basically a bamboo tube sealed on one end, attached to a pole or to a spear, and they would ignite the powder in that bamboo tube as a weapon in combat. And at some point, they figured out, gee, if we put projectiles on top of that powder, maybe that's an advancement. And it certainly was. So by the 12th and 13th centuries, firearms technology had reached across Asia and into Europe. And the first of those firearms in Europe were called hand cannons. And again, we're talking about not artillery, but firearms that can be utilized by a single person. Problem with these hand cannons, and again, they were simply a tube sealed on one end with some sort of stock or apparatus to hold it, powder in there and a projectile, and there was a touch hole through the side of the tube. And in these early guns, it often took two people to operate it because one guy had to hold it while the other guy set the charge on fire. And that could be done with a burning splinter, with a red hot wire, and they developed something they called a match, which was basically a slow burning fuse that could be used to ignite that firearm, that charge in that firearm. The next thing that happened was called a matchlock. Matchlock had that burning fuse, that match, on a unit so that when you pulled the trigger or pressed the lever, it would move that burning end of the fuse into a pan, ignite the priming powder, which communicated to the charge in the barrel and set off the gun. And it was somewhat cumbersome, but again, one guy could do it because you could hold it and arrange for it to fire. And in 1540, Coronado left Mexico City with about 1,200 Native Americans, 700 soldiers, herds of cattle and sheep, and got as far north into what is present-day United States as Kansas. And some of his troops were armed with matchlocks, and they were successful using those to kill American bison and American Native Americans. So the next version was a wheel lock. This is a matchlock, and this is probably Middle Eastern based on the designs, but again, it was a contraption. These are accessories that were in the stock that allowed one person to use it. The next thing that came along was called a wheel lock. And with a wheel lock, you had a separate tool that you used to wind a spring. And when you pulled this trigger, that spring was released, bringing pyrite against the striker up here. It worked a lot like a cigarette lighter, very similar to a cigarette lighter. So that's wheel lock. The next thing was flintlocks. Flintlocks came into use, about 1615, 1620, and were the predominant method of firearms ignition until the 1820s, when it was replaced by the percussion ignition system. And the percussion ignition system depended on a nipple where you put a percussion cap, a little metal cup with a priming compound in it. And it was obviously a great advantage over the flintlock, because the flintlock had powder in a pan, and when you pulled the trigger, the hammer struck the frizzen, showered sparks into that pan, that powder went off, and that powder, then that fire communicated with the charge in the barrel. So if the wind's blowing or it's raining, your flintlock may or may not work. Percussion cap solves some of those problems. And these are a pair of probably dueling pistols, percussion dueling pistols. So the next advancement was revolving firearms, multiple shot firearms. This is a Colt 1851 Navy revolver. And again, use the percussion cap on these nipples. And to load that, you would put a powder charge in each of the 6 chambers in that cylinder, put a ball or a conical bullet, a lead ball or conical bullet, at the mouth of the chamber, and then use this lever here to ram that ball or bullet against the powder charge. Then you put your percussion caps on there, and you had 6 shots ready to go. This is a Colt Navy or a Colt Army revolver, 1860 Army revolver in the case. Same loading procedures, and this shows both balls and conical bullets. This powder measure here and a bullet mold that would cast appropriately sized projectiles for that 1860 Army revolver. This is another Colt Navy. I like this one because it's got ivory grips and somewhat elaborately engraved. Again, powder flask, disassembly tool. This is a Winchester model 1866. It was the first rifle, first firearm to bear the Winchester name. And this again got the buttstock, and the fore end is ivory. It was chambered in 44 Henry flat, which was developed originally for the Henry lever action repeater, which is similar to the 66, except it loaded differently. It didn't have this loading gate, and it didn't have a fore end. It loaded it directly into the magazine tube. Here's another 1866 Winchester, and I probably put too many of these in here of that model just because I like them a great deal. When I was competing in cowboy action matches, I had an Italian-made replica of an 1866 Winchester that I was very fond of. This is the first large caliber Colt revolver. It was the transition between percussion and fixed cartridges. This one was made only for a couple of years, 1871 and 1872, because in 1873 it was replaced by the Colt single action Army. We have one of these upstairs. It's really interesting gun. There was also there were conversions. They called them Colt conversions of percussion revolvers to take fixed cartridges. And even though they were called conversions, a lot of them were manufactured, some with newly made parts, like the cylinder and the loading gate, but using sometimes the barrel and the frame, excess stock left over from the percussion era. So here's a Colt single action Army. Again, beautiful engraving. Got some rose gold inlays here, probably ebony grips. This is a civilian model because of the short barrel. In 1873, the United States military adopted both the trapdoor Springfield rifles and carbines and the Colt single action Army revolver as their standard issue. The military version had a 7.5-inch barrel. It's also available to civilians in a 5.5. This is a 4 3/4. And at that same time, 1873, they adopted the trapdoor Springfield rifle and carbines as the long guns for the U.S. military. The Colt single action Army with a 7.5-inch barrel and the trapdoor Springfield carbine was what the 7th Cavalry had at the Battle of the Little Big Horn. This is a cool gun. This allegedly was made for and belonged to Pancho Villa, the Mexican revolutionary. And I think this again was a firearm that was on that Rock Island auction site. But this is obviously gold. I don't know if that's damascene or inlaid, but gold. And again, carved ivory grips. Here's another Colt single action Army and an 1873 Winchester. That was the 73 was the next version after the 66, and it was in a stouter caliber, the 44 Winchester centerfire of 4440. And the cool thing was you could get both a Winchester rifle and a Colt revolver in the same calibers. So only to carry one kind of ammunition. This is a Colt Bisley. It's a variation on the Colt single action Army. But again, carved ivory stocks, lots of engraving. So we're making a transition to long arms, and it's sometimes difficult to tell with these whether it's a shotgun or a double-barreled rifle intended for dangerous game in Africa. And often the motif of the embellishments will give you a clue. This one I got no idea. They got otters, they got a fish, they got a frog, they got mice, they got a rabbit, little bird over there. I don't know if this is a shotgun, probably a shotgun, but again, just amazing handwork on these firearms. Here's one, obviously a shotgun because of the retrievers and the woodcock as the game that they're in pursuit of. Classical Greek is a common motif on some of these firearms. And again, I don't know if this is a shotgun or a double-barreled rifle. I'm guessing this one is a rifle for dangerous game, given the rhinoceros on it. And you can see over here, they got a giraffe, an elephant, zebras. So Daniel Fraser had good taste in his guns. Probably took that one to Africa on a safari. There's another obvious double rifle with the elephant inlaid in gold. There's one with the Cape Buffalo. This is a Rigby. Rigby was one of the premier English firearms manufacturers in the 19th and well into the 20th century. They were in London. So I don't know if this is a rifle or a shotgun, but it's Leda and the Swan, right? You know that story. Yeah. Zeus changed himself into a swan and seduced Leda. This is a modern, fairly modern gun. A Smith & Wesson 357 Magnum was introduced in the 1930s, I think 1935. Again, nice engraving, gold inlays, really excellent work. And here's another 1866 Winchester, and I brought this up because of the guy who did the work. This Nimsky was an engraver. In some cases, the firearm manufacturers would have an engraving artist as an employee. Nimsky mostly did contract work, and he did engraving for Colt, Smith & Wesson, Winchester, Remington, Sharps. All of the major makers were used his services, and he did just amazing, amazing work. So how did they do that? So here's Louis Nimsky, 1832 to 1904, master engraver. There's his tool set. So all hand work, no Dremels here. This was all fine work. Tiny hammers and chisels, and measuring implements. These came from his notebook, and they are kind of templates or ideas that he either designed himself or was attracted by someone else's work and recorded these in his notebook. And here's how they did it. You'll note the piece he's working on is in this vise with lead jaws so that there's no damage to the work he's doing. But can you imagine the detail of time that it took to do some of this elaborate engraving? Okay, now we're going to look at some firearms that are actually in our collection. And again, a very generous local collector donated these to the museum earlier this year, and it's just been a joy and a pleasure to work with them. There's a Schutzen percussion target rifle made in Vienna circa 1850, and this is one we have up here. You'll be able to take a closer look at it. The Schutzen was specifically designed as a target rifle, and there were Schutzen matches both across Europe and in the United States utilizing these incredibly accurate firearms. This is the thumb rest. It's carved as a dragon. That's this part here. It's elaborate carving here on the buttstock. And this is amazing. I don't, maybe only the people in the front row can see it, but there's this panel right here. There's a naked guy strangling a duck, and Shrek, the ogre, is over here looking off to the side. And I can't find any reference in mythology or history that explains what the hell's going on there. It's just strange. And here's more pictures of that same, or more examples of the work on that Schutzen rifle. This is the wood carving here. And again, a better picture of that buttstock. Beautiful wood, amazing grain in the wood. Okay, this is an 1863 Sharps percussion conversion. And this one really baffled me for a long time because it was a fairly common firearm. There were tens of thousands of them made by Sharps for use in the Civil War. And after the war, many of them, including this one, was converted from percussion to take the 50-70 fixed cartridge. So I'm chasing around what was going on with these rifles, and I ran across a firm called Schuler, Hartley, and Graham in New York City. And in the 19th century, they were the largest purveyor of firearms and military accoutrements in the United States. And they were pretty sharp dealers. When the Civil War started, neither the Union or the Confederacy had enough firearms to arm their troops. So Schuler, Hartley, and Graham sent people to Europe to buy up firearms, to bring them back to the United States to sell to the Union, and maybe also to the Confederacy, although they really didn't play up that. So as I'm doing this research, I'm going, what? Who would do this? A fairly common rifle. And the engraving is just amazing. It's one of the ones we've got up here you can take a look at. But on this side, it's got a gold bison head inlay. Everything is engraved. The lever, the trigger, the block plate, the half of the barrel, the butt plate is engraved. So again, doing the research, I started to speculate a little bit. And Jennifer wants me to be really careful when I say I'm guessing, and I don't know anything for sure. But this has a fleur-de-lis here, engraved in the stock. And it's got this R.A. Lalencetti engraved on it. So my theory is that this was either a reward, because after the Civil War, Schuler, Hartley, and Graham bought up a bunch of surplus American firearms and sold them back to Europe. And a lot of these went to France in 1870 for the Franco-Prussian War. So my suspicion is that R.A. Lancetti might have been somebody who greased the skids to make that deal. I don't know. We've contacted the French consulate in New York City a couple of times, and they just haven't responded. They asked for an email. I sent them an email. One of our curators wrote them a letter on museum letterhead. They just never responded to it. I've called them a couple of times, and you get the recording. It says, for English, press 1. You press 1 and they hang up. That's the French for you. So anyway, that's my theory. And when I'm doing this research, and you can see, oh, here's the inlay on the other side. And I thought at first that was a Viking, but it's just some goofy guy in a horned hat where that came from. So while I'm doing this research of Schuler, Hartley, and Graham, I ran across this firearm. And this is not ours, but I have to tell the story. This is Smith & Wesson, very early Smith & Wesson, probably their model 1.5. And during the Franco-Prussian War, while they were negotiating firearms sales, their representative in France was a guy named Reynolds. And at one point, Paris was under siege. Reynolds was in Paris. And he and one of the French officers got in a hot air balloon. On October 7, 1870, went up in this hot air balloon. The wind changed, took them over the Prussian lines. They got shot at. So this revolver was prepared by Schuler, Hartley, and Graham to give to their agent, Reynolds, after that war. And it's got a motto here. It says, nothing to be done without trouble. So he certainly had trouble. So the fact that they did this lends some credence in my mind to the fact that they might have also prepared that Sharps carbine for a similar reason, as a reward or as an inducement to do the deal. Here's a Merwin Hulbert revolver, circa 1880. I've also got this one up here. Again, just beautiful mother of pearl grips and engraving. Interesting revolver. There's a 14-gauge shotgun. We've got this one up here too. This is a pinfire revolver. And if you look closely at the barrels, there's a notch at the end, at the breech end of both of those barrels. So the pinfire cartridge had a little pin that stuck up from the cartridge, right? So you put the cartridges in the chamber, closed the barrels, and those pins stuck up. So when you cocked the hammer and pulled it, it crushed that pin down into the cartridge to fire it. We have some pinfire revolvers upstairs that I suspect came to the United States, possibly courtesy of Schuler, Hartley, and Graham for the Civil War. The downside of pinfire cartridges, if you didn't handle them carefully, had them in your pocket and banged against something and hit that pin, it could go off in your pocket. So neat little shotgun. Again, beautiful wood. You need to come up and take a look at that one. Here's some more on that same shotgun, just the elaborate engraving. Think of somebody sitting there with that little hammer and little chisel, making all those beautiful marks on that firearm. There's a LePage shotgun, it's a French shotgun. This is pretty cool. Also, beautiful wood. And came in the case, got all the accessories, the key to the case, powder measure with a viewer so you can tell how much powder you're getting, cleaning rod, cleaning brush. Interesting little shotgun. There's a greener. This is an English shotgun. It's royal grade greener, and the inlaid gold crown indicates that it's royal grade. And again, look at how intricate that engraving is. It just amazes me. I'm stunned by how beautiful that work is. Okay, this is another one that I like. This is a target rifle, and this is the patch box, so it's really elaborately engraved. But I like it because at this point on the stock, it's got that inlaid compass. So out hunting, you can find your way back to your horse or back to the house. There's a German Jaeger percussion rifle, 65 caliber, circa 1840. And again, just amazing. Jaeger means hunter in German, so this was a hunting rifle. And what's cool about this is that really the only metal is the trigger and the plate and the hammer. The trigger guard itself, wood, the patch box cover is wood. And elaborately, if you, again, you can come look at this because we have it up here, but there's this boar's head, a carved boar's head on the bottom of the stock. There's a half-stock percussion target rifle, Syracuse, New York, 1840. I like this one because it's not as elaborate. It's kind of folk art, right? I mean, it's got some nice scrolls here, but this is really just folk art. But it didn't have to be. When firearms first came into being in Europe and maybe in the United States, they were very expensive. So only the rich people or royalty or the nobles could afford them. And I think a lot of the guns that you saw earlier, particularly in the video, were probably owned by very wealthy people, because the military firearms and the firearms owned and used by the common man tended to be, as they are today, pretty basic and utilitarian. Well, I like this one because it's kind of folk art, but still somebody wanted their rifle to be special. And if you look close, at some point the deer head came off and was replaced with a little bit different shade of silver. Okay, this one really, I have no idea what's going on here. This is a really fine flintlock pistol. I think I'm going to pull it out of the case. Because it just amazes me. I can hardly get my finger in that trigger guard. Did they make this for a child? My kind of first glance, I thought, was it something that a gunsmith? Because in this era, guns were handmade one at a time. So was this something that a gunsmith made and said, this is what I can do full size? Well, I don't think so. But tiny trigger guard, even a lock is very small in a flintlock, and the pan is tiny. But it's about a 45 caliber, and it shows obvious signs of being carried and shot and used. So again, it's a puzzle. I don't have any. When you look for miniature flintlock pistols, you get toys and other things. I haven't found anything that I can relate to this particular little gun. Okay, what's next? Oh, this is one in our collection, also one that's up here. And this is a Colt 1851 Navy. And I really like the fact that this is an indication it was engraved at the factory, because the hammer is in the shape of a wolf's head. The engraving is intended to represent a wolf's head. And I really like this one because the trigger guard is worn on both sides. So again, this wasn't kept in a sock drawer. Somebody carried this in and out of that holster over and over again to wear that much off that brass trigger guard. And the engraving is again quite well done. It's not full engraving, but still a very nice piece. When I started out working in the collection, I was really fond or entranced by or attracted to these guns that were in perfect condition. And my mentor, Jim Allison, back there, taught me to appreciate firearms that had a story, even if you don't know the story. If it was somebody's working gun, if it saw a lot of use, that's probably more interesting than something, like I said, that lived on a shelf. Okay, here's a Joseph Manton of London improved revolving pistol. And this is called a pepper box in common jargon. And a lot of them, they were an early competitor to Colt's revolving pistol. They were cheaper to make, could be sold cheaper, but accuracy, they were double action only. So when you pull this trigger, not only did this big old hammer come up, but the barrel revolved, and then eventually the hammer would drop and fire the gun. There's no sights on it. So I think it was like card table distance to be useful. This is interesting is how we acquired this. Jennifer came down and said, I want you to look at some guns we got from Goodwill. I said, what? This was turned in with some other stuff at Goodwill, at the local Goodwill store. And they didn't find this until the person, the donor, was gone. So they had no idea who it belonged to. And there were two other guns that came in with it, but they were just decor items. They were not in any way functioning firearms. So, cool little pistol. I think we're about done. That's it. Questions, comments? Yes, sir.
And that last one you showed, were those like percussion caps?
Yep, it was percussion.
So you had to load those first.
Yep.
And then
Powder, ball, okay, and a percussion cap. And like I said, one of the other people that was here earlier, the percussion firearms, that percussion cap is tiny. And can you imagine when it's cold or windy or your hands are bloody or the Indians are coming to get those little things on those nipples? They did have an implement, a loader. It's kind of a spring thing like tweezers that would dispense those one at a time and give you a little bit more flexibility in how you put those caps on. Yes, sir.
In this substantial donation that you were referencing, how many, if I ask, how many guns were?
I don't remember the exact number, 30 some?
Yeah.
Hopefully 30 firearms. It was amazing donation, amazing collection.
Yeah.
The closing remarks?
I know you're given dates. On average, the firearms we were looking at, what periods? 1830s, 1870s?
Like I said, matchlocks, 1600s, 1500s. Flintlock came in about 1630. Percussion in 1820. The percussion cap was invented by Minister of Scott. But that was 1803, but it took several years to develop the system and refine that ignition system. So that was their percussions started 1820, 1830. By the start of the Civil War, 1860, we were starting to see cartridge firearms. Smith & Wesson manufactured the first revolver for a self-contained cartridge, 22 short, in 1857. In 1860, both the Spencer repeater and the Henry repeater were patented and introduced. So,
Thank you.
sure.
of course, inauguration of commemorations continues today.
No, absolutely.
With special commemorative models for various things. 1911, let's go over John Wayne rifle.
Winchester did a ton of them. The first commemorative by Winchester was for the Diamond Jubilee of the state of Wyoming. It was the first of the commemoratives. The territorial prison in Wyoming has a really nice collection. A person donated about 20 of those Winchester commemoratives. They are now on display over there. Yes, sir.
How many weapons are in the collection here?
And some are out on loan, around 350.
Really?
Yeah. And that includes some rusted wrecks.
Sure.
As well as the nice ones. But yeah, about 300.
But it depends on where the Western is.
There's that, yeah. The one I've been working on recently is an 1860 Cold Army revolver, and it's got balls in 5 of the 6 chambers, and a percussion cap on one of them. And it was allegedly, when it came in, it was supposedly owned and taken to California by a guy named George Jinks, who was a Wyoming pioneer. But the two revolvers that were attributed to him, he was supposedly in California, 1850 to 1852. One of the revolvers was made in 1853, the Colt Army in 1875. So they weren't his guns. The education coordinator here said, you got to stop destroying and claiming all the good stories of our firearms collection.
I was wondering, is this collection going to be on display within the museum, or are you using it for YouTube purposes, or?
I've done several of them on YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah.
We just finished a new firearms exhibit here. But all the firearms that we put in that exhibit have a very direct Wyoming connection story. And while these are beautiful firearms and probably will be on exhibit at some point in the future, they don't really have a connection other than the fact that it's a collector. In my opinion.
Cool, thank you.
You're welcome.
So as Evan mentioned during his talk, they made arrangements to have some of the firearms up here on display for you. So you're welcome to come up and look at them and chat with him and Jennifer, the collection supervisor, about the firearms. And then also Evan mentioned that they have, last fall in 2023, they put up a firearms exhibit in the museum, which is just wonderful and has a lot of story with it. And I encourage you to come and see that when the museum is open. Okay. Next month, our speaker is Mike Castle and Starlee Talbot. They were going to be talking about their new book that's out about famous people buried in the Lakeview Cemetery. That's in February. And then we are booked for the whole year for 2024. All of our programs will be here this year. So we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the program.